Happy Good Friday. Welcome to the 3 Things I Learned, SaaS, Sports, Tech, and Lab events. This last week, my son and I, we had finished our first season together playing fantasy hoops. He's 11 years old. We joined for fun and we ended up winning. And as the season went along, it was stunning to me how many corollaries there were between building a fantasy hoops team and running it through an 8-month season and what we did at TicketManager. It was a wonderful learning experience for us both, and through it we talked a lot, surprisingly much more than we thought, about the life lessons we learned in building a business. So this week we're going to cover the 4 things we learned in building a business and how that applied to fantasy sports. Number 1, the beginning is the hardest part. When a fantasy season starts, everybody's excited about it and they're motivated. They're spending time looking up who the great players are going to be. They're looking at matchups. They're setting aside time during their day, and it gets really difficult to win. My son and I started 2-3, and we fell behind pretty early in week 6, so it wasn't looking very good. We ended up 17-4. There's a number of reasons why, but one of them we've covered here in the past. When we started a business, it wasn't any different. You don't start on even footing, but you start out with everybody optimistic and committed to what they're doing. We had competitors who had raised some money, we had competitors with big customers, and it felt like we were all starting from the same spot. But as adversity starts to hit, as bad things start to happen, you lose an account or you lose people, some people can't or won't bounce back. They don't right the ship. They just decide to take their ball and go home or quit and move on to the next thing. We learned that in all fantasy sports we've played, and talked to my son about that regularly, that most fantasy leagues, by halfway through the season, a third of them are gone. The numbers are even worse when it comes to the startup game. Just this last year, during this season, we hit a major milestone in the ticket management business. All of the founders that were around during that original push from 2001 to 2010 are now gone. The last one left last year. The only one left is me. As we learned in fantasy sports, being resilient and sticking around, can't win if you don't do it. That's number 1. 2, when it comes to potential, play the long game. My son's favorite player is Klay Thompson. Now, at the beginning of the season, Klay Thompson was coming back from a devastating leg injury and nobody knew if he was going to play or when. We drafted him anyways, 1, because my son loves him, and 2, because, hey, there's a good opportunity that he could be a major contributor later in the season, and, as we'll talk about in a second, I messed up the draft and we didn't have a lot of talent. Klay sat on our injured reserve for the first half of the season, and then when he did come back, he wasn't very good for a couple of weeks, and it really hurt us in that first couple of months because we didn't have the roster flexibility that we needed. Back in 2013, we were hiring for a position here that was in VIP sales, and we came down to 2 finalists. One finalist was a traditional salesperson, and it was a sales job, but another finalist was a superstar right out of college that we really wanted to come work here. We ended up giving the position to the traditional salesperson, but called in the superstar the next day. We didn't have a position for them, but we were going to make one. We didn't know what they were going to do, but we just knew we needed them on our team because of the potential that we saw there. That person is still here today and is now on our executive team, and she's the heart and soul of the business. When we came down to the finals, at 8:22 p.m. on Sunday, after 8 months of playing, we were tied at 3,068 points. Who was left playing? Klay Thompson, who went for 41 points against the Pelicans and won the fantasy league for us. Play the long game with potential. That's number 2. Number 3, do the best with what you have. So when we signed up for this league, it was an afterthought, and I messed up the sign up and we missed parts of the draft. So we auto-drafted a bunch of players we didn't want that didn't give us any roster flexibility. We were stuck with James Harden. We didn't really like him. We had a number of point guards, and we didn't have anybody in the forward position that was going to be good. Colin Sexton got hurt very early. He was an early pick of ours, gone for the season. Paul George missed the second half of the year. And then James Harden decided he didn't want to play basketball for a few months. So we decided that all we could do was play differently. We had to work the transaction wire. We had to make sure that we were looking at the waiver claims and compete with teams that didn't have the injury problems that we had. The team we played in the finals had Trae Young and Joel Embiid, and it made less than half as many moves as we had throughout the season. In 2008, when the financial meltdown happened, our investor pulled out of us, left us with absolutely nothing. We could have whined and kicked and screamed about it, but all we could do was play the cards we had. We had a big pitch the next week. We've talked about that here with Centerpoint Energy in Houston to keep the business alive. And we went in and we did the best we could with what we had. We didn't go the traditional route. We pitched with who we were, as opposed to the strength of our competitors. It paid off. We won that business, and we ended up winning the league. So, number 3, do the very best with what you have, because it's never going to be perfect. Finally, number 4, which expands on number 3 a little bit, play through the ups and downs no matter what. We lost Sexton for the season. James Harden decided he didn't want to play anymore. And then we got to the finals and Dejounte Murray got sick and couldn't play, and he was our best player that was left. You're going to have a lot of things thrown at you that you can't control. And in a startup, that happens even more. You'll have a top rep leave. We've had that happen. You'll have a big customer choose somebody else. We've had that happen. You'll have an investor pull out after being an investor in your business. We've had that happen. You'll have people change on term sheets at the last minute. We've had that happen. All of those things happen in the startup game, just like they do in fantasy sports. But you just have to keep playing through the ups and through the downs. Don't make panic decisions and stick with who you are. Who knows? Maybe it'll pay off. It was looking pretty dicey with 4 or 5 days left in the season when Dejounte Murray went down, but we stuck with what we were doing. A couple of things broke our direction. Next thing we know, we won it on the last day of the season. Playing fantasy hoops, it was an afterthought when we signed up, so much so that we actually named our team Trying to Delete after we messed up the auto draft. But it turned into an incredible blessing that had lessons for both of us as the season went along for 8 months. We ended up winning. I don't think in the end that's going to matter. What's going to matter is all the times that my son would text me throughout the day and we'd talk about it in the mornings. It really brought us closer together, and the journey was better than everything. It's funny because that's kind of how we look at TicketManager too after 14 and a half years. That's it for this week on the 3 things. We'll see everybody next week.